Hello, in this video I'm going to show how to build a to-do web application using Angular 2 and Aurelia. My name is Raja Mani. I live in San Jose, California. I'm very passionate about software technologies. I blog at opensourcenetter.blogspot.com, and this video is complementing the blog post with the same title. Okay, let's start building the applications. I'm going to be using the command line interface tools from Angular 2 and Aurelia to build this application. If you want to know how to install the command line tool, please run the command npm install angular-cli-g for global setup. And if you hit enter, it's going to install the Angular command line tool. Since I've already installed the tool on my computer, I'm not going to do that. For Aurelia, you're going to be running npm install aurelia-cli-g and enter. It's going to take some time to install. Since I've installed both these tools on my computer, I'm not going to run them again. The next thing that you want to do is to create a new application. To create a new application in Angular, you will use the ng tool. When you ran npm install angular-cli-g, it installed a command line tool named ng. So I'm going to create a new application by typing ng new and the name of the application. I'm going to call my application ng2-todo-app and hit enter. It's going to start in creating the application. Similarly, on Aurelia, I'm going to run au new and then the name of the application. Aurelia asks a few questions because it supports a lot of options. I'm going to use option 2 to create a TypeScript project, and I'm going to hit enter for the other options, which is going to set them to the default option of creating the project structure as well as running the npm install to install all the project dependencies. These two commands might take 2 to 3 minutes, so I'm going to pause the video and come back right after it's done. Now that we've created the projects and installed the project dependencies, it's time to run the application. On the Angular side, to run the application, I'll be typing the command ng space serve. And it will transpile the TypeScript files and bundle them using Webpack and start serving the project from port 4200. On the Aurelia side, to run the application, I'll be using the command au run with the -- watch parameter or switch, which will keep an eye on the file system for changes. Okay, once they both transpiled and bundled and ready to serve, we can always go to the browser and hit localhost 4200 to run the Angular application and open up another instance of the browser, go to localhost 9000 to see the Aurelia application in action. There we go. They both are ready to serve now. Okay, so I'm going to open up two Google Chrome browsers and I will go to http://localhost 4200 for Angular 2, and it displays the message app works. For Aurelia, I'm going to hit localhost 9000 and that displays the message hello world. Let us open up the project and source code generated by these two tools in Visual Studio Code now. Let me switch back to the command line. I'm going to stop this tool from running the application. I'm going to by pressing Ctrl C. Then I'm going to open up the project in Visual Studio Code by typing code space dot, and I'm going to dock my Angular 2 application on the left side and Aurelia application on the right side. Similarly, I'm going to type code dot to open the Aurelia application as well, and I'm going to dock it on the right side. So you can always remember that the left side of the screen is all about Angular 2 and the right side of my screen is all about Aurelia. Okay, now I'm going to open up the app.component.ts, which is the main or the root component, and I'm going to change the message from app works to hello world from Angular 2 and save it. And what I'm going to do is from now on, I'm going to use the integrated terminal, which you can hit by clicking on the view integrated terminal, or if you can use the control backtick, it'll open up the integrated command line tool. And one of the cool things about this integrated command terminal is that it opens in the same folder from where you launched VS Code. That means you are inside the project folder now. So I can type ng-serve and it'll start serving the application. Similarly, I'm going to click View Integrated Terminal on the other side, and I'm going to run the Aurelia application by typing au run dash dash watch. So once they both start serving on the ports 4200 and 9000, you can go ahead and hit the browser or refresh the browser again. I'm going to change the message here to hello world from Aurelia and save it. Okay, now let's go back to the browsers and let's hit the refresh button. So one says hello world from Angular2, the other one says hello world. Let's see, maybe I didn't save it. So let me go back and then I will save it. Once you save it, it'll detect the change and then reload the application. Okay, so now we got hello world from Aurelia. Okay, cool. So now let's start building our to-do class. I'm going to use the command line tool to build the to-do class. For Angular, you can go back to the commander and you can type ng generate, and the shortcut for generate is G class and the name of the class, and hit enter. For Aurelia, you can directly go and create the class, or you can also use the command au generate to do. But Aurelia always generates a component, which means that you will get a pair of a TypeScript and a HTML file, and then you have to later move them from another folder into your source folder. So that's going to take some time. So it's easier to create the class directly in Visual Studio Code. So let's go back to the Visual Studio Code. Okay, and then here I'm going to take that todo.ts class generated by the Angular command line tool and then add three properties: an ID property, a description property, and a done property, and also a constructor. I'm not going to sit and type everything. I will copy the source code from my completed application so you can follow along. Like I mentioned, I'm creating an ID, description, done properties, and also a constructor that takes an object and then it uses the ECMAScript 6's object.assign call, which will just take whatever the object structure you pass, and then it'll only copy the properties that matches the one on the left side, which is going to be this. This is pointing to do, which means that it'll only look at the properties ID, description, and done. You could pass a huge JSON structure, it doesn't matter. It's going to only look at those three properties that it is interested in and perform a deep copy. That's the cool thing about object.assign. Similarly, on the Aurelia side, like I said, I am directly going to create the class instead of depending on the command line tool. So I'm going to call todo.ts and the source code is going to be exactly the same. So I'll copy the source code and paste it over there. And if you save these two projects now, nothing is going to happen because all that we did was create a class and we haven't used it from any of the user interface, so nothing will happen. So just make sure that as soon as you save, they both start transpiling and then making sure that there are no errors. If there are any errors, you would have seen on these two terminals by now. Okay, so the next thing that we want to do is to write the unit test using the Jasmine framework, and both Angular2 and Aurelia have the build targets for unit tests. They both use Karma test runner and also use the same Jasmine framework. So the unit test code is not going to be any different at all. So I'm just going to show you how the unit testing is done on Angular 2 and Aurelia. So let me create a simple unit test. And the convention that I'll be using is the name of the class .spec.ts to indicate that it's a specification. Okay, so let's go back here and let's create a class called todo.spec.ts. Okay, you can click on this toolbar button to collapse the file explorer so you can see your source code better. And I'm not going to type the source code. I'm going to just copy and paste my unit test code and I'll explain that. Okay, so in here, I'm importing test bed and async, although I'm not going to use them. First thing we want to do is we want to import the class that you want to run the unit test on, which is called to do. And this describe is going to be describing my unit test, and it uses the it function to mention a condition, and then it has a lambda expression also called as the arrow function that has an expect call, and it says that when I say new to do, it has to return the true the. So that is a very simple constructor test. The next test is going to be really interesting. It should accept the values in the constructor, and then what it does is it creates an instance of a to-do class, and then it checks if the description property is equals to hello and the done property is equals to true, which is what we have assigned in this object. And the final one is it should ignore the values sent in the wrong properties. Like I mentioned, you could pass any object you want, but if the object properties are not matching, the object.assign call will ignore them. For example, here I have ID, description, and done, whereas I'm passing something called as title. So that property is going to be completely ignored. So the only property that will make any sense is done. So it is checking if it is equal to blank string, which is the right thing to do because we didn't pass the description, whereas we passed true for done. So that's how you create a unit test using the Jasmine framework. Okay, so as soon as you saved, the Angular command line tool is transpiling and bundling using Webpack. No errors seen so far, so everything is looking good. And what we'll do is on the other side, we'll do the same thing. todo.spec.ts, and we're going to copy the whole thing. As you might have guessed by now, the first import does not make any sense because we don't have any such class in Aurelia. So we can just remove that line and save it, and this should also compile. Instead of going back and forth from Visual Studio Code into the commander, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create another command line tool. You can click on this plus to create another terminal. I'm going to click on the plus to open another terminal, and to run the Angular unit tests, you will run the command ng space test. Similarly for Aurelia, you need to first build the test. So you have to type au build, and once the build is completed, you're going to type au test. They both will launch the Chrome browser, and then they will run the unit test, and then they will display the result of the test in the terminal itself. Here I'm going to type au test. Now you can see that it's launching the browser Chrome. On the left side, wow, it says two failed. Let us see why it failed. Similarly here, it it failed here as well. So let's check. Okay, but we're getting errors in both the Angular application and Aurelia application because we had the other test over here, which has some conditions like it's looking for the string app works and app works. If you remember, we changed that to hello world from Angular 2. So what we need to do is we need to go back and copy that message so that it will be passing as well. So to make these two tests pass, we have to change the text in here as well. And then we will save it. As you can see, the tests are being compiled here because the Angular ng server also makes compiles the tests as well. Similarly, we'll go into the Aurelius unit test. There is the test folder. Underneath that, you have a unit folder. There you have app.spec.ts. And in here, what I want to do is I want to go back and get this message, hello world from Aurelia. And we will pass that string over here as well. Now let's go into the second command prompt and let us type ng test in here. Similarly here, we will do an au build first, and then we will do an au test. They both should launch the browser and let the unit test run, and then they will show the results in here. Okay, it's all success in the Aurelia side. Let's take a look at the Angular side as well. Yep, it's all success. Okay, so that covers the unit testing on both frameworks. There is not much of a difference. They both use the same framework and the same runner. Okay, now let's move on to the next step of creating a simple service class that'll perform the CRUD operations on to-do. So I'm going to call that todo.service.ts. For creating the service class, the Angular command line tool has a option called ng generate service followed by the name of the service class. So I'm going to go into the, we can open one more terminal and we'll just say ng generate service and call it to do. And that should create a todo.service.ts file. Okay, and it'll always create a spec file as well, which is the unit test file. But we can ignore that for now. On the Aurelia side, we'll have to create the service ourselves because it's just a plain class. So I'm going to create a class named todo.service.ts. This service class is going to have some CRUD methods. So I'm going to bring the code that I already created and I will go over the methods. It's going to be exactly the same on both Angular 2 and Aurelia. The only difference will be that there will be a small decorator here called @injectable, which means that this class can be injected into any other class in Angular. So you can see that I created a last ID, which is going to hold the ID of the last added to-do class, and I maintain an array of to-dos, and we have an add, delete, update, and get methods. So the add method is going to check if the ID is blank. It's going to increment the last ID and then assign it, and then it calls todos.push to push the newly created instance of to-do into the array. Delete will use the filter method to check the ID, and if the ID matches, it will return that to-do object. And then we will in here what we do is we use the not equals ID to filter out that one object that matches, and the rest of the objects in the array will be assigned to the to-dos. So this is using the elimination technique. And the update to do, we will use the helper method called get to do. If you scroll down a little bit, the get to do is also using the filter method, and then it uses the dot pop because in general the filter method will return an array. Even though this will only return a single element in an array, we want to use the pop method to pop the first element, which matches the ID that we pass. So, and that to do will be checked for null, and then if there is not null, then we will update by using the object.assign. Like I already explained, you don't have to pass the full object here. You can pass any object shape you want, and object.assign is very smart. It'll only assign the values or properties on the left hand side object. So if you want to modify either description or done, you don't have to pass the full shape. You can just pass a JSON structure that has either description or done or both, and it will only pick up those that matches the properties of the left hand side argument, which is going to be the to do class. The get all to dos is simply returning the array, and the toggle to do done will change true to false, false to true on the done property. We'll talk about filtering later. Okay, so I'm going to copy the same code and I will paste it onto my Aurelia as well. In Aurelia, you don't have to mention anything like injectable or anything because by default all classes are injectable, and we can remove this import as well. Okay, so if you save it, it'll start compiling. Let us move to the first command prompt so we can see that they both are built successfully without any errors. Okay, so now let's move on to the styling of the application. To do MVC is a very popular POC application for all popular frameworks. So if you go to todomvc.com, there are samples for quite a few JavaScript frameworks. So they also maintain a style sheet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the npm install to bring those style sheets that are already available for us. So I'm going to go into this command prompt and I'm going to run npm install to do mvc-app-css and to do mvc-common. These two are the CSS files that are created by this todomvc.com developers, and they have made sure that CSS is consistent. So you can use whatever JavaScript framework you want, but if you use the CSS, they'll all have the same look and feel. So let's run that command. Similarly here, I can open up another command prompt and run the same command as well. So once those two commands finish execution, we'll have the CSS available for us. Now what we will do is we will include them in the styles.css file generated by the Angular command line tool. So I am going to import them, and I'll also add two more custom styles that I prepared for this demo. So I'm just going to import that using the @import syntax of the CSS syntax, and then I'm going to just say go to node modules to do MVC common and bring this base.css. Similarly, node modules to do MVC app CSS index.css. This is the one that we just installed using the npm install command. And I'm creating an app root loader command which just aligns the text to the center with a padding of 30 pixels. Similarly, I'm creating another toolbar style with this gray color, and then we have some padding, height, text align, and border and float to the right side of it. Similarly, we will do create a styles.css on Aurelia as well. So I'm going to create a file named styles.css inside my source, and we will copy the same CSS code on this side as well. Okay, let's save all on both sides so that it will start transpiling them. If we go into the first command prompt where we have the runners, which is the AU run and the ng serve, they both have finished bundling. Before I show how to use the styles in the views, I'd like to bring up one small difference between the two frameworks. In Angular 2, there is a event for handling the key up, and also it has a part where you can specify which key you want to handle. For example, if you want to handle the enter key, you could say key up dot enter. Whereas in Aurelia, you have a DOM event handlers, but there is none to handle the enter key. The recommended practice is to use the form element and then a form tag, and then use a button type equals submit underneath that to handle the enter key. That won't be helpful when you have multiple forms, or when you want to handle the enter key from different form elements. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to create a custom attribute in Aurelia called key up dash enter, and then I would like to use that custom attribute to handle the enter key on any element I want. To create a custom element in Aurelia, let's go into this command terminal, and then we'll run the command au generate attribute and the name of the attribute, which is going to be key up dash enter. And that will generate a custom attribute under the resources attributes folder. So in here, what I want to do is I want to add the code that I already prepared, and I'll go over that quickly. So in here, I will just paste the code. And as you can see, it uses the @auto inject decorator in TypeScript. This is very powerful. The @auto inject will automatically inject the objects that matches the constructor argument types. For example, it is looking for an element. So Aurelia's dependency injection container will automatically inject an instance of type element. In other properties that we have in this class, or value, which is a function, and then there is another function of type enter pressed, which takes an event as an argument that doesn't return no values because it's void. Okay, so inside the constructor, since the element on which this attribute is defined is injected, we can assign that into the this dot element, which is the element property of the class. And then we also have this lambda expression where we say this enter pressed equals e is the argument, and that is a arrow function. where we check what is the key that is being pressed and then we get the key code as well. So then if the key code happens to be 13, which is the key code for enter key, then we just call this dot value. The value property will be the one that is assigned to that attribute. For example, this key up enter custom attribute will become key up dash enter when you want to use it inside the markup, which is HTML. There we'll say key up dash enter equals a name of a function, and that property, automatic property, is the value property. So this dot value is when you use the function parenthesis, it is going to evaluate whatever is the function name that you gave in key up dash enter. So that's how easy it is. And similarly, we have these two events attached, or two callbacks called attached and detached. On attached, we add the event listener for the key press to point to this enter pressed arrow function, and on detached, we remove the event listener. So that's the simple key up enter custom attribute in Aurelia. Okay then, now let's move on and create our first to-do application component, because we have the root component, we have the model class or our view model, which is to do, and we have the service class ready, but we need something that connects all of this, which is going to be our to do application component, where we will use that component and a view associated with that component to render the form, where the top portion will be an input form and the bottom portion will be a simple list that shows the list of to-do items. Okay, let's create that component in Angular 2 first by using the ng generate command. So we know in Angular the shortcut for generate is G. So ng g component, and I would like to call that component to do app. Okay, I will call it a custom element. So it's au generate element followed by the name of the element. To do dash app is the name of the element that I want. Okay, so on the Angular side, it created a CSS file for the component, an HTML file, a unit test file, and the actual view model, which is the class, TypeScript class. So it generated 4 files. Okay, so let's go take a look at the TypeScript file, which is the component file, and then we'll start adding our application logic. Okay, so I am going to bring up the source code that I already prepared, and I'll explain that. Okay, let me maximize this so we'll have enough space to go over. Okay, so the first thing is I'm importing the component non-init objects or from the Angular core, and I import my to-do and my to-do service. Okay, so I use the at component decorator, which is the decorator in Angular to indicate to indicate some of the parameters required for this component. A selector is the actual name of the tag that we'll use in the view. The template URL is the HTML that will be rendered when Angular 2 sees that tag, and it has an associated style URL, and it also has providers, which means that what are all the dependencies that it has. Like for example, in our case, we want to have a to-do service injected for this component, so we use the providers parameter to property to declare an array of dependencies, which is going to be a to-do service class in our case. Then we have a to-do app component class that implements the on-init. Okay, then there is a ng on-init method. If you want, you can put some initialization code there. Now I'm not going to use that. We have 3 properties declared here. New to do is going to be a type of to do, and we have a blank to do object instantiated, and then we have a filter which we'll use to filter the to dos, and then we have filtered to dos which is going to adhere to this filter. For example, if you say all, it's going to return all the to dos. If you say completed, it shows only the completed ones, and there's going to be an active filter which will return only the to dos that are not done yet. Okay, and then the constructor, because we have this to-do service set up as a providers, it also gets injected through the constructor. So we can, in TypeScript, we can do private to-do service, so you don't have to do a this dot to-do service equals to-do service. This is a shortcut syntax in TypeScript. Okay, and the add, if you look at the function names, you will have a one-to-one mapping from these functions to the service functions because they are simply wrappers on top of the service functions. The only difference is after every operation, every CRUD operation is done, it will call the filter to do because we need to include the newly added or deleted or modified to do item as part of the filter. Because let's say, for example, if we have three items and then you add one more item and the filter happens to be the active item, you want that filter to pick up the newly added item. Similarly, when you delete or when you modify, you want this filter function to be applied every time when there is a change in the state of the to-do array. Okay, so toggle to do done. We've already seen that. Remove is simply deleting it. Filter is going to assign the current filter, which is coming as an argument. It's a string argument that has three values, all, active, and completed. And then we call the services filter to do. Let's go into the filter to do method because I didn't explain that when I was first talking about it. It has a simple switch statement. And all it does is based on the string criteria that is being passed, it's going to check if it's active, it's going to check the to-do items where the done is false. That means they're active. Completed where the done flag is true, which means they are done. All and default, if you don't give any criteria at all, it'll always return the full array. That means all to-dos in that array will be returned. Okay, so it's that simple. And complete all to-dos by the name. You must have guessed by now it'll automatically go through all the to-do items and set the done property to true. Remove all to-dos will remove the array and it will call the filter to make sure that the filter is respected. Similarly, remove done to-dos will only delete the completed to-do items. Okay, and we'll save it. If we go to the first command terminal, it'll start compiling. If there are any errors, we'll see them. No errors, so we are good with the app component. Okay, now let us move on to the markup or the view side of it. Okay, so I'm going to copy the markup and I'll explain that as well. Okay, let me open up the app component HTML, which is the markup, and this dummy markup will be overwritten with the actual markup. Okay, in here, as you can see, I have a header and a section, and then followed by that, I have the h1 tag, which is going to be to display the title, and then I have a div class toolbar. This is what I added in my styles.css to give that gray background and so on. So then I have three links. The first link is the first link's click event handler is pointing to remove all to-dos, which means it'll remove all the to-do items. The next one is pointing to the remove completed or to-dos, and then the last one is complete all to-dos. So they're all just pointing to the corresponding method inside my to-do app component. And then I have a small form which displays a simple text box, and I have a placeholder of what needs to be done, and then I have the autofocus, which is the HTML5's autofocus that's set. And then here is the syntax that Angular2 uses for two-way binding: a square bracket followed by a parenthesis and ng model equals new to-do dot description. So there is a property called new to-do in our app component, as you've seen. This new to do, and then inside of that you have a description property. That's what is being bound to that text box, and it's a two-way binding, which means that when you make a change in the UI, it'll reflect in the view model class, or when you make the change in the TypeScript class description property, that'll be reflected in the UI. And similarly, we have the key up enter. We don't have to write any extra code. It's coming out of the box in Angular 2. Key up is the event and the enter key. If an enter key is pressed, then you call the add to do, which is what the right thing to do. When you after you type the description in the text box and if you hit enter, that'll automatically be added to the list of arrays, and you will see that displayed down below the form. There's going to be a list, unordered list and list item where it shows all the to-dos that we add. Then the next section is where this list of to-do items are shown. We have this star ng if, which checks this criteria. If the criteria is true, only then this whole block will appear in the DOM. Otherwise, this whole block will be skipped and you won't even have anything to render on the screen. So it checks if the filtered to-dos, because we want to make sure that there are at least some items to show on that list. If there are no items, that is the length is equals 0, which means that there's nothing to display. But if it has at least one item, which is greater than 0, it's going to start coming into this, and then it'll start rendering that. The next interesting one is the ngFor attribute, which is going to loop through the filter to dos, and then for every filter to do, it'll take the value and assign that into the local to do. And then this class dot completed, the class is the HTML class attribute, and then it's going to set the value to completed if the to do dot done property is true. And then we have an input type checkbox to check the task, which means it'll set the done property to true. So here we have the class as toggle for that nice little stylish check mark. And then on the click of that checkbox, we call the toggle to do done property, which we've seen, a toggle to do done method, which we've seen in our component. All that it does is it sets the done property to, it just toggles it. That is, if it's true, it becomes false. If it's false, it becomes true. And checked attribute is set to the to do done based on the value of the done, whether it'll show the check mark or not. Finally, we use that string interpolation syntax, which is a double curly brace, also called as mustache, which is, this is not the ECMAScript standard, but this is the standard that Angular 2 team picked, and it'll just render whatever expression value is inside of that double curly brace. And finally, we have a button that shows up on mouse over. On click of that X mark, it is calling the remove to do, which will delete the to do current to do item from the to dos array. So that is the middle part of it, and there's a footer as well where we show the number of items on that particular filter, and we also have a anchor for um, anchor to show all items, active items, completed items, and all it does is it just checks the properties, and it checks if the filter equals all. It sets the selected class, which will show a small box around it to show that is the selected filter. And on click of that, we'll call the appropriate we'll call the filter to do method with the appropriate argument, which is going to be all or active or completed. Okay, so that is the UI of the app component. So let's save it. And then we have to invoke this to do app component from our root component. It's going to be very simple. We need to go into our app component HTML, and here we have this default generated code. All that we are going to do is we are going to call to do dash app slash to do app. So because if you look at the code in the to do app component, I mentioned the selector as to do app, so that becomes the name of the tag, and that's what we used here. And then we have to open tag and close tag, and we save it. Boom. Now it's going to, if we go back to the browser, we should see the form appearing there. Okay, there we go. So we can see the top link, which is what we have generated here in this part, which we call as toolbar. And then the next one is the form. That is what you're seeing here in the input type. And then followed by that is the unordered list. Because there is no items to show, right now it is blank. But as soon as you add one value and then hit enter, that gets added. Um, we can add a few more, and we can check one of that, which means it is done. And now if we go into active, we should see only two. And if you go to completed, we should see that completed item. If you go to all, it'll show all of them. As you can see, the number of items, the count will change based on which view you are moving to. 3 items left, 2 items left, 1 item left. And similarly, we can say remove completed, which means it'll remove the second item, which was checked, and complete all. And we can say remove all as well. So that is the to do application in Angular 2. Now we'll switch our attention to Aurelia, and we'll do the exact same thing on Aurelia. Let us bring up the Aurelia source code. I'm going to maximize that. We already generated the element, custom element. We are going to add the code. Let me go into the elements under resources folder, where it created the pair of the view and view model. In here, I am going to go ahead and copy the code that I already prepared. It's going to be very similar. Um, let us get the code, and I will paste it over here. So in here, I'm bringing the inject. Here also you can do the auto inject, but I want to show the inject here, where we explicitly specified what is the type of the object that we want to inject. And then we import the to-do and to-do service. We have the same three properties, new to-do, filter, and filter to-dos as well. And in the constructor, we pass the argument, which will be injected, and add to-do, toggle to-do. Then the functionality is exactly the same. And here also we have the filter to-do function, which will automatically filter the view. Now let's go back into the view. In the view, you will see a lot of differences between Angular 2 and Aurelia. So I'm going to get the view source code. Okay, let me paste the markup code. Okay, the top part is it might look very familiar, but if you notice that Aurelia uses the event name followed by dot trigger. There's also a dot delegate, which we're not going to see in this video, but the dot trigger, click dot trigger means when the click DOM event is fired, invoke this method, invoke this function. That's the same thing everywhere. So wherever you want, you can put the DOM event name dot trigger. Okay, and then the form here is going to have an input element, and here we use the value property dot bind. Value is the standard attribute, and then dot bind will figure out whether it has to do a two-way bind or a one-way bind depending on the HTML element type. By default, the text boxes are two-way bound. You can take a look at the Aurelia documentation because not all controls are two-way bound. Some are one-way bound as well, depending on the type of the control. Aurelia determines it. But if you want to explicitly specify that, you're welcome to do that by calling value.two-way. But always, I like to give the bind, let the Aurelia figure out whether it is two-way or one-way, unless I want to change the behavior explicitly. Similarly, if you notice this key up dash enter, this is the custom attribute that we wrote like a few minutes ago. We wrote it in under the attributes. We have this key up enter, and there's a value property. And what I'm doing is I am just using the dot call syntax to call the add to do function. So this function becomes the value of the value attribute, and that's what is being called whenever we hit enter. So this is a special syntax dot call. And I mean, like an attribute dot call means it knows that the argument is the value is a function. Okay, and that goes into the value property of that custom attribute, and that's what we are calling in line number 15 here. Okay, so that is the form, and then this is here we use the repeat dot for, which is the Aurelia's attribute, but it follows the ECMAScript standard to do off. It uses the for off ECMAScript 6 standard. Here we have the show.bind. I could have used if.bind as well. Show.bind will figure out whether it has to show or hide, whereas if.bind will figure out whether this block of code has to be injected into the DOM or not. Either one will work, so I can use if.bind as well. But if.bind is doing the DOM manipulation, whereas show.bind will be as simple as changing the, saying adding a CSS style to show or hide the element. Okay, so the unordered list has an li, and then I have repeat.for, which means it'll enumerate the filtered to-dos. And in here, I use the class binding. I check if the to-do.done property is true. Then I add the completed style. Otherwise, I leave the style class as blank. I can use the ternary operator. And if you see that, I'm using the ECMAScript 6's string interpolation syntax. So it's a standard again. Input type checkbox, again, check.bind. Dot bind is used for attribute binding, and dot trigger is used for event binding. So it's very straightforward. If you remember that, it is consistent throughout the code. And then again, we use the string interpolation one more time for displaying the description, and we use the click dot trigger for removing the to-do items. In the footer, again, we use the same syntax. We use the class binding to check if the filter is all, then we put the selected style. Otherwise, we put the blank class. And similarly, in click.trigger, we are calling the filter to do with the all active or completed criteria. And similarly, we have some counts as well. where we show the number of items left based on the filter to do's arrays length property. Now let us save this and we'll go to the first terminal and we'll run au run dash dash watch, and oh, I have to save this as well. Okay, once it starts serving on port 9000, I'll switch over to the browser and hit localhost 9000. Okay, so here I will go into the Aurelia to do app and refresh. Okay, the reason why we still get hello world from Aurelia is that we haven't wired our custom element into our app.html. Okay, now let's change the app.html to use our custom element to do app. You can see that there's a require from to require that style.css, which includes the two CSS files that are from to do MVC application. So there's one little thing that I wanted to show you in Aurelia is like even though you call to do app, and you have to require that to do app from the resources folder that we have. Instead of calling the require from everywhere in the view, there's something called as the global view resources, which we can declare in the index.ts file of the resources. As you can see, there is a comment out there. So if you undo that, you can comment, uncomment that, and then we can add what all we want to use as global resources. The first thing we want to do is we want the elements slash oh, we even have the attributes. First thing we will do is we'll get the attributes, and the name of the attribute is going to be key up dash enter. We want that to be a global resource, and then we also want the elements slash to do dash app. That's the name of our component, to do dash app. Yes. So once you add this into the global resources, you no longer have to do the require from wherever you want to use that. So this will simply render without any issues. So now let's go back into our Aurelia to-dos and we'll see that it got rendered. So now let's perform the same operations that we did in the Angular. So we'll add an element, we'll add a to-do item. We added 3. Now we can check. So it is completed, and we go to active. It shows 2 items left. We go to completed, it shows 1 item left. When you go to all, it says 3 items left. And then we can do the remove completed. We can complete all, remove all, and all functionalities work. Now let's come to the conclusion side of it, where we will just do a comparison between Angular 2 and Aurelia, having completed a to-do application using both the frameworks. Okay, let's go to the comparison table that I prepared. In Angular 2, I see the framework code explicitly in my application code because Angular 2 uses explicit declarations via decorators. Whereas in Aurelia, I don't see the framework polluting my application code, both in the JavaScript as well as in my HTML markup, because Aurelia uses conventions and web standards. It's hard to switch to another framework because my application has too much of framework code. Whereas I can easily switch from Aurelia to another framework because my application code is reusable and standards-based JavaScript code. Angular 2 uses non-standard syntax like square bracket, parenthesis ng model for two-way binding, star ng for, star ng if for conditional attributes, and parenthesis event for event handlers, and double curly brace aka mustache syntax for interpolation, which is not a ECMAScript 6 standard in the HTML markup. These are not web standards. Aurelia follows web standards like web components because it uses a template and slash template, which is a valid HTML tag based on web component standards, and ECMAScript 6 string interpolation, that is the dollar curly brace syntax. Angular 2 has great support from third-party vendors like Telluric, Kendo UI in particular, who are writing the Angular directives. Aurelia has great support from Syncfusion. Please check out the URL aureliajq.syncfusion.com. The Aurelia UX Bridge project, which is a sister project to Aurelia Framework, is a community-run project, and that has created components for Telluric, Kendo UI, and Materialize. Angular 2 is more popular because it is from Google and people hear about it everywhere, be it a conference or other software companies' websites like ASP.NET Core or MSDN or Channel 9, etc. Aurelia is gaining momentum because its creators are presenting in popular conferences like NDC and sites like Channel 9, etc., and other web podcasts. Aurelia is also supported for .NET Core officially and talked about in MSD Magazine and on Channel 9. More Channel 9 content is coming soon. Angular 2 has been in development for a very long time. Angular 2 documentation has gotten much better compared to the Angular 1 documentation. Aurelia has a very aggressive release cycle and they have frequent releases. The Aurelia.io hub documentation has gotten much better, very detailed oriented, technical, and useful for any new developer who wants to get onto the framework. Plugins are available for IntelliJ, VS Code, and other popular editors for Angular 2. Plunker supports Angular 2 templates out of the box for quick online application development. Plugins are available for IntelliJ, VS Code, and other popular editors for Aurelia as well. Aurelia team built Just Run. Check out https://just.run. Just Run is built using Aurelia itself that can run your gists for online application development. Just is a small snippet of code that you can create and check it in online. Aurelia has the Plunker resources as well, created by the core team member Jeremy Danio. There are lots of books out there started using the early releases of Angular 2 but are constantly updated already for Angular 2. There are only 2 books available out there for Aurelia. Both are still under development now. There are more books and videos coming soon. There are many learning resources like video tutorials out there from Pluralsight, Wintellect, Egghead, etc. Besides a lot of other tutorials on YouTube. There are so many enthusiasts who blog regularly on Angular. On the Aurelia side, there are so many enthusiasts who regularly blog about Aurelia besides Aurelia's core team members. There aren't that many learning resources out there, but the ones that are available are really top quality resources. Rob Eisenberg's official 3-part Aurelia virtual training videos at that URL and on Vimeo are awesome. It is a great move from the Angular team to use TypeScript, which is a typed superset of JavaScript instead of their proprietary Dart language. Aurelia itself is written using ECMAScript 6 and 7 and has great starter kits, also known as their skeleton navigation projects, in both ECMAScript 6 and TypeScript. Some of the new plugins in Aurelia are built using TypeScript. When it comes to hiring front-end developers to work in Angular 2 projects, you need to look for skills like TypeScript, understanding of module systems like Webpack or System.js, and give them an in-depth training on Angular 2 fundamentals because it has a steep learning curve. When it comes to hiring front-end developers to work in Aurelia projects, all you need to look for is skills like JavaScript, ES6 or TypeScript is a plus, understanding of module systems like Webpack or System.js or Require.js, and give some training on Aurelia fundamentals because it has a simple learning curve. Although you'll find many front-end developers who might have heard about Angular 2, knowledge of Angular 1 is not required at all because the framework has changed so much from version 1. You'll not find that many front-end developers who might have heard about Aurelia, which shouldn't matter because the framework itself is 1.5 years old. It should be very easy to train any front-end developer on Aurelia. This is changing rapidly as more people are hearing about it regularly. Well, now to the conclusion part. Both Angular 2 and Aurelia are very modern JavaScript frameworks with very good open source community backing them up. If I were to start a project today, I would pick a modern, modular, and standards-based framework like Aurelia. While others may have different opinion, which is perfectly fine, my suggestion for the viewers of this video would be to pick a framework that works for you, your team, and your company. Again, there may be fanboys from both sides. Please provide some constructive criticism and useful comments and feedback. I would be very happy to hear from you. As you can see, I didn't have time to cover or compare the other features like nested custom elements, routing, how to invoke the HTTP web services using fetch, and so on, because it's there are quite a few features in both these frameworks, and to cover all of them in one video would be a Herculean task. So I did what I could do within that time I had, and then with a quick and simple application like a to-do application. Happy coding. Thanks for watching.